Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Antonio Torija Martinez. I am a lecturer in acoustic engineering at the University of Salford. I also hold a position of visiting fellow at the University of Southampton. Within UKAN Plus, I'm involved in the early career executive board, and I am the champion on manufacturing and transport, and I'm pleased to work on that area with other colleagues, like for example Professor Antonio Filippone here this afternoon. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about psychoacoustic modeling of rotor noise. So this is a research we've been doing for a couple of years, probably more than that. So this is a collaborative research with other colleagues like my colleague Dr. Chaitanya Parachuri at the University of Southampton and Dr. Chen Wan Li in China. So this is the outline of my presentation. So I have prepared a 20 minutes presentation, more or less, in order to allow enough time for discussion after that. So my main motivation this afternoon is probably provide a high level description of the research we're doing, introduce some of the main concepts in psychoacoustics that are important in order to aid the design of these systems. Probably again briefly outline some of the results we are getting at the moment with our ongoing research. So this is the outline of my presentation. So I'll discuss how are we transitioning, or how are we proposing to transition from some power levels, dBAs, to a more comprehensive assessment of rotor noise using psychoacoustic metrics. Then I will talk about the research we are doing at the moment on psychoacoustic modeling of rotor noise, focusing on control rotating systems. So I will describe the experimental setup, the psychoacoustic analysis we have done, and also the psychoacoustic annoyance model we have developed. As I said before, this is a collaborative research along with my colleagues Chen Wan Li and Chaitanya Parachuri. So as all we know, we are in this very exciting time when we are seeing the introduction and development of more electric aviation, starting from drones to novel aerial vehicles, eVTOLs here. Oh, sorry, not sure what happened. Two eVTOLs here. So at the moment, we are in this area. We are focusing on drones. We are focusing on applications of drones and what can we do in order to optimize those operations in order to reduce noise impact on communities. But ahead of us, we have this very exciting opportunity as well to innovate in the psychoacoustic optimization or the acoustic optimization in general of these new vehicles, these so-called urban mobility vehicles. So the core of my research, or my main research at the moment, is based on perception-driven engineering. So what we want to do with this research is trying to connect the physics, in this case the aeroacoustics, with the noise perception, with the psychoacoustics. It's quite a challenging. It's a quite challenging topic because it's quite a challenging task, because you need to understand what's going on in terms of the sound generation of the sound. You need to also understand what's going on with the apologies, not sure what's going on with that. So you need to understand what's going on with the sound generation of the sounds. Sorry, with sound generation, you need to understand how is that influencing perception. Again, you need to work at the interface between two disciplines like aeroacoustics and psychoacoustics, And that's, as I said before, is quite challenging. So focusing on an aircraft, for example, if we have a given design, if we have models in order to simulate the sound generated by this aircraft, or predict the noise generated by this aircraft, something we can do is we can implement those models. And once we have those numerical predictions, we can implement some auralization techniques in order to produce some audible files of this design. Again, this is quite challenging. Once we have this auralization, something we can do is we can use that audio files in what we call subjective experiments or listening experiments. So we can do these simulations. So for example, a flyover along a given trajectory, we simulate the emission, we simulate the propagation towards a given receiver. So this audio file simulating the perception of the sound at a given receiver on the ground is what we can use in these subjective experiments. Once we have these subjective experiments, what we can do is we can get information from participants. Then with the analysis of the signals using, for example, sound quality metrics and the responses of the participants is where we can develop our rules, our models in order to influence the design of these vehicles, in this case, an aircraft, in order to minimize noise impact on the ground. Okay, so again, just to summarize, what we want to do is we want to connect the sound generation mechanisms with the noise perception. Okay, so what we want to do in order to do that is we want to go from the traditional approach, dBAs, basically talking about sound power level or LAQs, to psychoacoustic metrics in order to get a more comprehensive, a more holistic assessment of the sound. So these psychoacoustic metrics are really good in order to understand how the auditory system is responding to the sound. So these psychoacoustic metrics are able to account for all the features that are relevant when we are assessing noise annoyance. So these psychoacoustic metrics have been used for years already in automotive industry, and also for evaluating the sound quality of products like home appliances. And it's more and more than these metrics have been used or have been proposed to be used in aviation industry. I can mention some previous work done by Steve Ritchie in NASA, pushing for this agenda, for basically using more psychoacoustic metrics for the assessment of novel aerial technologies. So these psychoacoustic metrics includes a wide variety of parameters. So we have metrics like loudness to account for the perception of the amplitude of the sound. We have metrics like sharpness to account for the perception of the high frequency, which is a factor driving noise annoyance in aircraft. We have tonality to account for discrete or the perception of deterministic noise. We have fluctuation strength and roughness, both of them accounting for amplitude modulation of the sound, fluctuation strength focusing on a slow amplitude modulation, and roughness focusing on rapid amplitude modulation. And also we have impulsiveness, which is accounting for the perception of sudden increases in sound pressure level. So these are the metrics we are proposing and we are using in our research in order to provide a more effective, more holistic assessment of rotor noise. We also know that there's not a single feature, psychoacoustic feature, that we need to take into account when assessing rotor noise. So there are usually a variety of things, a variety of parameters, a variety of psychoacoustic factors we need to take into account in order to understand, in order to predict noise annoyance. This is the reason why some of these models have been developed in the past, these so-called psychoacoustic annoyance models. So these psychoacoustic annoyance models, what they have is they have a combination of different parameters. For example, here we have a factor for roughness. Sorry, we have a factor for roughness. We have a factor. Sorry, we have a factor for accounting for sharpness. We have another factor accounting for fluctuation, strength, and roughness, and we have loudness. So basically, we have this equation here, this formulation here, used to predict psychoacoustic annoyance as a function of these psychoacoustic metrics. These psychoacoustic metrics and especially these factors for sharpness and factor for fluctuation, strength, and roughness, have been derived empirically. So there have been quite a lot of subjective tests carried out during several years with a lot of participants in order to derive these equations. Okay, so this is probably the most important and the most well-known psychoacoustic annoyance models, which was produced and developed by Stryker and Falst a few years ago. A few things to say about this. If we want to implement this equation, this formulation, or this model for rotor noise, we see two things here. The first one is that we don't have any factor accounting for tonality. This is because these psychoacoustic annoyance models was developed for other purposes in the past, and there was the assumption that the tonality effect was included in this in the loudness. So we were only accounting for the loudness of the tone or the deterministic noise, but also we don't have any information here about the impulsiveness of the sound. And there's been some research suggesting that the impulsiveness might be a significant factor in order to account for noise annoyance in rotors in rotor noise. So we have those two limitations in this sort of model. Okay, so now what I would like to talk is about some of the research I've been doing with my colleagues Dr. Lee and Dr. Chaitanya. So this is focused on psychoacoustic modeling of rotor noise. So our goal, our objective in this research was to investigate the relationships between primary order design parameters in rotary systems and noise perception. So we did a quite comprehensive set of measurements in Southampton. My colleague Dr. Chaitanya did those. And we focused on three things here. So comparing counter rotation with single rotor systems for the same thrust, investigating different blade diameters and thrust in both counter rotating and single rotor systems. And also we focused on different rotor axial spacings in counter rotary system, accounting for varying blade diameters. So because we don't have a lot of time this afternoon, I will only focus on this third case of changing what is the change in psychoacoustic metrics and perception, noise annoyance, if we change this axial spacing in the counter-rotating systems. So talking about the data we used, so we have measurements conducted by Dr. Chaitanya Parachuri at the University of Southampton. So Chaitanya used T-motor blades of 14, 16, and 18 inches. Also, we measured different axial spacings. So you can see in this figure the test rig we used. So we used different axial spacings expressed as the distance as a function of the blade diameter. So we measured different positions from 0.05 to 1. Again, this relative position as a function of the blade diameter. And also Chaitanya did measurements with a thrust ranging from 2 newtons to 20 newtons in steps of 2 newtons. So once we have our data measure, what we did was we selected a set of sound stimuli accounting for different combinations, including variations in thrust, variations in blade diameter, variation in axial spacing. Again, this is only for control rotating systems, and variations of the emission angle. As you can imagine, the emission angle will play a significant importance in terms of the noise emission and also in the perception as well. So with all this data, what we did was a subjective experiment. This experiment was conducted by Dr. Chen-Wan Lee. Basically, we implemented this magnitude estimation method, this relative magnitude estimation methods, where we presented a number of sounds to the participants. For example, test sound number 1, 2, 3, or 4, and they have to compare with a reference sound. So the reference sound, we gave in a value of 100 in terms of annoyance. That was an arbitrary value. And then they have to assess the annoyance of these test sounds as a function of this reference sound. So of course, all the sounds were randomized. So there's not there wasn't any bias in the results. And the participants assessed about 90 sounds. The experiment took about 45 minutes to complete. And basically, we got a rating in noise annoyance for all these different sounds. And again, accounting for these variations of thrust, blade diameter, axial spacing, and emission angle. So this slide present the results of the calculation of sound quality metrics or psychoacoustic metrics, sorry, for the different sound, the different conditions. So what you have here is a number of figures. So let's focus on this figure here on the top left side. So in this figure we have loudness in the vertical axis. So loudness is measuring sounds. And the reason why you have bars here is because we are including here all the sounds. We are including sounds with different thrust, different blade diameter, different emission angle. But what is important to see here is that there is a clear trend. So this is the median value. There is a clear trend in the loudness as we change the axial spacing between the rotors in this counter-rotating system. We can see that there is a kind of an area with minimum loudness around this 0.2, 0.4 axial spacing. I'll talk about that, reasons of that in a moment. We can also see, for example, that there's a decrease in tonality beyond this 0.2 axial spacing. Same for a fluctuation strength. Again, remember fluctuation strength is accounting for a slow amplitude modulation. Again, there's a decrease in fluctuation strength after this 0.2 axial spacing. For roughness and impulsiveness, we see an increase in their value as we move the rotors apart from each other. Okay, so let me give the interpretation, the psychoacoustic interpretation of these results. So when the other thing to say before going to that description is here is the results we got from the participants, from the actual noise annoyance reported by the participant as a function of axial spacing, reported annoyance. And we can see here again that there is a quite well-defined trend with a minimum in reported noise annoyance in this area of 0.2, 0.4 axial spacing. Again, this is actual responses of the participants in terms of noise annoyance. And we can see that this is quite in line with the values of loudness, but also with values of some psychoacoustic metrics used, for example, tonality and fluctuation strength. So when we have rotors closely spaced, so very close to each other, we have an important contribution of potential field interaction tones. That's dominating the sound generation. If we start moving apart the rotors, we observe a decrease in the loudness, tonality, and fluctuation strength. So we observe a decrease in tonality because we have a decrease as we increase the spacing. We have a decrease in tonality because we have a decrease in the amplitude of these potential field interaction tones. If you have a reducing the amplitude of those potential field interaction tones, we have a consequent reduction in loudness as well. And also, as we move apart the rotors, this beating phenomena, this interaction between the rotors is decreased, and therefore we have a decrease in the fluctuation strength parameters. So there's a moment where we reach this optimum spacing, and if we move apart, if we continue spacing the rotors after that optimal spacing, what we have is we have an increase in interaction noise due to enhanced turbulence propeller interactions. And this is described by my colleague Chaitanya et al. In a paper. This is due to the unsteadiness in the tip vortex. Okay, so we have, as we increase the spacing of the rotors, we have this extra turbulence created. And that means that we have an increase in loudness, but at the same time, we have an increase in roughness and impulsiveness. Roughness and impulsiveness, because those two parameters are really good parameters in terms of explaining the perception of this turbulence noise. So we can use those parameters, those factors, psychoacoustic factors, roughness and impulsiveness, for accounting for that perception of the presence of turbulence. And so what we found in a previous paper is quite in line with these results, and is that this optimal spacing in counter-rotating and counter-rotating systems is about 0.2, 0.4 in this relative spacing compared to the blade diameter. Other thing to say about this is that the actual aerodynamic, the optimal space, the optimal distance for aerodynamic purposes is also in this range as well. Okay, and the other thing we have done is, once we have our data, because we have a comprehensive database of sounds with sound quality metrics calculated, or psychoacoustic metrics calculated, and also we have reported annoyance for those sounds. So what we have done is develop our own psychoacoustic annoyance model for rotor noise. So basically, this is the equation describing our model. So we are taking Stryker's model. We are adding a tonality factor developed by these D et al. Colleagues in 2016. This is a well-known tonality factor. We are developing our own factor for impulsiveness. We have identified that impulsiveness is quite important in the perception of rotor noise once we have an important contribution of turbulence noise. So we have developed our own impulsiveness factor. And what we did was, with all these factors, is we ran a nonlinear optimization process, and we calculated these coefficients in order to develop our psychoacoustic annoyance model. As you can see, this psychoacoustic annoyance model is working really well. Is able to replicate quite well the values of the reported annoyance from the participants. So we have an R² over 0.9, which is quite good, and we are hoping to generalize those results with further measurements and further experiments. I'm just finishing my presentation. So this work has been done in the framework of the Inception project. So the Inception project is consisting of the best of breed technologies, working collaboratively, developing quiet and safe zero carbon electric jet engines to power flying aircraft to meet the requirements of the zero carbon agenda. This is a collaborative work with different industry partners and the University of Cambridge. And the impact of this research is to address noise issues to enable this zero carbon aviation agenda. So that was my last slide, and now is